Let's paint the fluffiest little sea otter floating peacefully in Alaska's icy ocean. Hello, and thank you for joining me. Today we're painting one of Alaska's cutest little ocean residents, the sea otter. Let's begin by gently erasing our sketch lines so they won't interfere with the softness of the watercolor layers. Now, using a very diluted base layer, begin defining the overall shape of the sea otter. Keep your brushstrokes loose and fluid here. While the paper is still wet, we're going to use the wet on wet technique to softly introduce darker tones into the areas like the head, arms, and chest. Let the color naturally spread and blend on its own. One of the best things about watercolor is allowing the paint to move freely. Sometimes those soft edges and unexpected blends can help create a natural softness, perfect for fluffy animals like sea otters. Now, while these later dries, let's move into the background. Apply a soft blue wash for the sky, keeping it light and calm. Then use deeper, richer blues for the ocean beneath the otter. Try to vary tones slightly as you paint. Oceans are rarely just one flat color, especially in Alaska, where the water reflects changing skies, clouds, and movement. Now that the otter's base layers has settled a bit, we can begin adding darker and more saturated paint to define the head, arms, and chest. Start slowly building contrast while keeping the edges soft in some areas. Fur in watercolor often looks best when it's suggested rather than over-detailed. As this layer dries, let's return to the ocean and begin adding movement to the water. Using different shades of blue, paint soft wiggly lines, swirls, and ripples around the sea otter. These flowing lines help create the feeling that the otter is gently floating on the surface. Sea otters always seem so relaxed, like tiny floating vacation experts. Now back to the painting. Using a finer brush and slightly less water for more control, begin refining the sea otter's facial details. Carefully define the eyes, nose, and mouth with small intentional brushstrokes. Tiny details like this are what brings expressions and personality into the painting. You can also begin adding subtle, darker tones around the fur to increase texture and depth, especially around the face and chest. They're also known for floating on their backs, wrapping themselves in sea kelp so they don't drift away while sleeping, which honestly might be one of the cutest survival strategies in nature. And yes, sea otters absolutely made this series because they're ridiculously adorable. As you continue building layers, use a slightly more saturated paint and more intentional brushstrokes to create texture and shadow throughout the fur. Notice how darker areas help the lighter sections stand out even more. Watercolor often creates highlights not by painting white, but by carefully building shadows around them. And speaking of sea otters, here's a fun fact. Sea otters have the densest fur of any animal on Earth. They can have up to 1 million hairs per square inch. Instead of relying on thick layers of fat like many marine mammals, that incredibly dense fur is what keeps them warm in Alaska's icy waters. As you move between the water and the otter, continue balancing soft washes with sharper details. Take your time here. Watercolor rewards patience, layering, and knowing when to stop. Step back every now and then and look at the painting as a whole. Notice how the ripples, colors, and textures all work together to create atmosphere and movement. And after the video ended, I decided to add one final little detail. Even though the sky was already painted a soft blue, I added a few stars inspired by the Alaska state flag. It felt like the perfect way to give the otter a sense of place and quietly tie this painting into the larger Alaska watercolor wildlife series. A tiny floating otter beneath Alaska stars just felt right. Continue refining your details until your sea otter feels soft, peaceful, and full of personality. And when the fur, water, and the tiny expression all come together naturally, that's when you know your painting is complete.